Without losing time, I would go to the next presentation and give the floor to Karim Fathi. He will, as the second author of the book, talk about key perspectives on the coronavirus crisis, from the resilience to multi-resilience. Karim is, as Roland Benedikter, member of the Future Circle of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research for the German federal government. He publishes, investigates, and consults on societal multi-resilience and communicative complexity management. Great, Karim, that you are on board on this conference, which is, as I mentioned before, not a press conference, but definitely a presentation of your great book. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to my presentation. I'm already sharing my slides, and I'm happy to present you some of the core ideas of our book. Wait a minute, full screen. Yeah, and in the following, I will present you some core ideas. You will, in the following 20 minutes, you will learn what is so special about the corona crisis and in how far it's a so-called bundled crisis. Secondly, I would drill deeper into the concept of bundled crisis and crisis bundles. What does it really mean, and how far it is so important to consider in the post-corona world, and nowadays in complex times. Thirdly, you will learn in how far already existing concepts of resilient societies prove to be narrow and limited. And fourthly, I would go deeper into the concept of multi-resilience. You will learn the 5 dimensions, or get a first insight and impression about multi-resilience, societal multi-resilience. Yeah, just to begin with, as Harald already said, resilience is a certain way a buzzword. What can we understand from that, and what definition did we use? Currently, there are a couple of definitions. In our book, we used a very broad definition, which is applicable to different types of resilience and different system levels. That means it can be applied to resilient persons, resilient organizations, and resilient societies. So the definition we used was resilience as the ability of a system, so person, society, or organization, to overcome crisis, or also to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. This was popularized in the book from Solly and Thiele. Furthermore, we should also distinguish between 3 types of resilience related to 3 phases of crisis development. That means we can distinguish between a preventive resilience, so before the crisis, in terms of anticipatory governance, so in terms of also of the capacity to anticipate unexpected or unpredictable events. How can we prepare for that? And this is of particular importance also for post-corona crisis, also crisis bundles and bundle crisis. Then secondly, we can also distinguish or consider resilience, a type of resilience which occurs during the crisis. So the ability to respond in an adequate way to contemporary challenges. Lastly, also the context of after the crisis, resilience can mean the ability to recover from a crisis or a problem in terms of bounce back. So just by finding back to a normal state, or in terms of bouncing forward, so finding a new normal and to develop out of the crisis. Also, in this regard, this can also mean to draw some learnings from the Corona crisis and to apply that to the post-Corona times. Furthermore, we can also, or we should, in our opinion, we should also distinguish between at least 3 different system levels where resilience can manifest. And I'm talking here about the individual level, so resilient persons, resilient organizations, and resilient societies. And of course, Harald has already said that resilience is a certain way a buzzword. And of course, there are also critical observers stating that resilience is an all-in-one notion. And how can we compare the individual level with the society level? These are quite very different entities and contexts. But in our book, we came to the conclusion and to the insight that it is important to include and to integrate all of these 3 levels in a multi-level perspective. In particular, the Corona crisis proved that it is important to consider all of these 3 levels at the same time, because the Corona crisis affected individuals, persons on the individual level, organizations, and societies in the same way. So thus, it is important to develop also a multi-level perspective. We were asking ourselves, given the fact that on all of these levels, there are a variety of problems and challenges which can occur, and we have to respond to that. We were asking ourselves, in how far is it possible to define and to develop universal principles which can be applied to all of these different challenges? And we found out that at least in the context of individuals and organizations, there are already existing concepts which can be applied to a broad variety of crises. So for example, here in this level on psychic resilience, there are, according to studies which have been coined by Amy Werner in the middle of the 20th century, at least 7 universal factors. And that means as soon as we as persons can develop more or less some of these factors, we develop our capacity to respond to different challenges, or we might become better in that. Similarly, also to the organizational level, organizational resilience is a much newer context. Since the 1990s, it has been considered in resilience research, and the findings are quite similar. Also here on this level, on this system level, we can find several concepts which can be applied, several universal concepts which can be applied to different challenges which can occur on this level. So that means, for example, the concept of high reliability organizations, or the newest one, and I'm already showing that as an example, the ISO norm 22316, and the idea is the same. As soon as organizations achieve to develop their capacities in these 9 factors, these 9 resilience factors, they have a lot of resources to respond and to react and to cope with several problems which can occur on this level. And on this level, typical problems can be financial crisis, new market trends, or innovative disruptions, and so on. Yeah? So as soon as organizations develop that, they become more, in a certain way, also multi-resilient. We were asking ourselves, is there something similar on the society level? And this is of crucial importance, since the society level is much more complex than the other levels I've already mentioned. And we're asking ourselves in our book, and the focus of our book is indeed the society level. Are there similar universal factors which can be applied to very different challenges which can occur on this level. And yeah, we came to the conclusion there are a lot of concepts, but all of these concepts prove to be very limited. In the following, I might show you 3 examples. Yeah, the first example here, for example, on regional resilience, which has been developed by the Pestel Institute in Hanover, Germany. It works with about 18 indicators, and yeah, the purpose is here, similarly also to the other concepts, to define indicators in order to measure and describe and develop societal resilience. But if we have a deeper look in that, we can find out that the focus is really limited. It's mainly applies to ecological risks, natural hazards, maybe also to a certain extent economic risks. But it cannot be applied to the refugee crisis or to the corona pandemic or to cyber terrorism also. So we can see here it's only partially applicable to several problems. Similarly, also with the next approach on the World Risk Index, the focus is quite similar. It's also very narrow on ecological risks and problems and natural hazards. If we have a closer look at the criteria, we can see there's quite a difference. Here, for example, exposure to natural hazards. And this is insofar important since when we have a look at a society like Japan, Japan would be, according to the regional resilience approach, which you can see in the middle, would have a higher rating because Japan has a lot of resources, economic resources. It has very robust infrastructures. It has earthquake-proof architectures and so on. But with regard to the World Risk Index, that's what you can see here on the right-hand side, Japan would have a lower rating. Why? Because it has a high exposure to natural hazards. It's very often, relatively often affected by earthquakes, tsunamis, and so on. So at this point, you can see a problem. How can we define the resilience of a given society? It's not easy to measure. It's really, yeah, it's really dependent on the context. According to our research, the most promising approach is on community resilience. This is a very new approach, which has been developed out of a meta-study. Later on, we'll hear more about that. Yeah, it's about 9 to 10 criteria, which can be applied to a broader variety of crises and challenges. However, even this approach proves to be a certain way limited, because also that cannot be applied to a refugee crisis or the corona pandemic, but to much more crisis contexts. So what can we sum up? All of these different approaches, and there are a dozen of these approaches, are limited. And as a society, we have a variety of global problems would happen at the same time. So like natural disasters, economic crisis, ecological crisis, and so on. And there are also best practices, how we can respond to each of these crises. So nothing is lost. But although there are some best practices and some resilience strategies, this focus and that what we have in terms of contemporary resilience methods proves to be limited. Why is that so? And is it in a certain way, does it in a certain way make sense to look for universally applicable factors? According to our book, to our research, yes. Because of 3 factors, or we have we can confirm that with 3 notions. Because we as societies, we are confronted with crisis bundles, bundle crisis, and resilience paradoxes or rebound effects. What does it mean? So the first slide here, you see a typical figure for a crisis bundle. A crisis bundle means that several risks and problems we are facing are interconnected, and it is not enough to find sole limited answers to each of these risks. We have to keep a multi-perspective. Take, for example, climate action. We have climate change, global warming, and natural hazards and extreme weather. Yeah? This is strongly associated with resource scarcity, water crisis, and which itself is strongly related to involuntary migration. So the next refugee crisis, which itself has social and economic impacts, and so on. So we have a bundle of crises. We have several crises which are interconnected and happening in the same time, and we have to find accordingly multiple answers to that. And this is only the context of crisis bundles. Then we have also bundled crisis. What does it mean? Bundled crisis means that we have a crisis, but this crisis itself is so complex that it has multiple impacts. Take, for example, the Corona crisis. The Corona crisis is a typical bundle or bundled crisis. As we have seen, it has multiple impacts, like not only affecting the health system and the physical health of the population, but it has also, it leads also to economic and social disruptions. It has huge effects also on the psychological well-being. So this is typical for a bundled crisis. And also here, this shows that we cannot find a sole answer to that. We have to gain a multidisciplinary and multi-level perspective. Lastly, the resilience paradox, the resilience paradoxes. This notion means that as soon as we are finding an answer to one of these problems, it leads to vulnerabilities and to unwanted side effects or rebound effects in other dimensions. Here again, with the Corona crisis, there is a high infection rate. We are trying to find a response to that by making use of restrictive methods, a lockdown, for example. And this, in turn, has a huge impact in terms of economic, social disruptions, and also further impacts on the psychological well-being. So an answer in one dimension leads to problems, and a resilience strategy in one dimension leads to vulnerabilities and further problems in other dimensions, so that a cure can be worse than the disease. So in the end, by considering crisis bundles, bundle crisis, and resilience paradoxes or rebound effects, we conclude that it is important to develop a concept in terms of multi-resilience, to gain a multi-resilience perspective. What does it mean? Multi-resilience means the ability of a system, here a society, to react to multiple challenges in an adequate way. And this requires a high degree of complexity awareness and according capacities. In the last slide here, in the following slide, I'm giving you just a short overview about at least 5 dimensions we have to consider in order to develop multi-resiliency in societies. This will be just a very short, further details can be found directly in the book. So the first pillar is on competency development. What does it mean? It means it implies an education system or changes in the education system to systematically develop and foster personal resilience of the population, but also other competencies which are relevant, communication competencies, but also futures literacy. So this would require just small changes in the education system, and we could make a change here. Secondly, the second pillar would be is on decision making. Decision making is a core competency which is required in terms of crisis management. Any crisis management is about decision making, and here the implication is, and this is described also in detail, that we should we should develop effective and time-efficient decision-making strategies in any context by also integrating centralized and decentralized decision-making strategies and institutions, and yeah, so just like that. Thirdly, this is also one of the core ideas of collective resilience. Collective resilience on the bottom line is about being able to react and anticipate unpredictable challenges and unpredictable problems and events. So this is what is important here in this regard, to be able to anticipate the future and future challenges, for example, by fostering anticipatory governance and by making more systematic use of scenario planning methods and so on. Fourthly, collective intelligence. It's also a very basic core competency. We can foster and develop the whole collective problem-solving capacity of a social system like a society via communication, by fostering communication across disciplines and by integrating different perspectives. This is the core principle here. So it means knowledge generation across disciplines by incorporating not only the insights of virology, for example, in the corona crisis, but also insights from social sciences, future sciences, and other sciences, but also across different society sectors, including science, civil society, private sector, public sector, and so on. Last but not least, it's also about resilience culture. Here, it's meant by a collective mindset, which is more resilience oriented, and hereby a crucial role is played by the media and the political communication, and this can have a strong influence on the collective mindset of a given population. A good example can be found in New Zealand, for example, which has a self-understanding of a team of 5 million, which proved to be very effective as a response to not only the corona crisis, but also other crises like terrorist attacks in Christchurch and so on. So that just very briefly, I'm closing with 4 main theses. So what have we learned? The coronavirus crisis is a bundled crisis, a very highly complex, multidimensional bundled crisis. We have also learned that current concepts on the resilient society proved to be limited in the face of bundle crisis and crisis bundles and rebound effects. Thirdly, we have to develop multi-resilience, not as a substitute, rather than as a complement, integrative strategy and integrative perspective. Lastly, we have also learned that multi-resilience is based on at least 5 dimensions, which can be used as a leverage point to develop the capacities of a society. Yeah, so far, thank you very much.